What if the biggest expense in your life isn't your rent, your groceries, or your bills, but a silent force you've never been taught to recognize? What if the real cost of living in 2025 has almost nothing to do with prices going up, and everything to do with something far more hidden? Because while everyone talks about inflation, interest rates, and the economy struggling, very few understand the deeper truth. The system wasn't built to become unaffordable by accident. It was designed to. Welcome to Dollaroid, the place where we decode money, power, and the hidden systems shaping your financial reality. To understand how we reached this point, we need to go back not just a few years, but decades when living costs were tied to something predictable. In the mid-20th century, a single income could support a family. One job often covered housing, food, transportation, education, even savings. The cost of living grew slowly, tied to real productivity and tangible value. But beneath the surface, a shift was beginning. Governments and financial institutions discovered a powerful tool: inflation. Inflation wasn't always seen as a problem. Leaders began treating it as a solution. A little inflation made debts easier to repay. It encouraged spending. It fueled growth. But once the gold standard was removed in 1971, the floodgates opened. Money no longer represented real value. It represented policy decisions. Printing currency became effortless, and every new dollar quietly reduced the value of the ones already in your pocket. At first, the effects seemed subtle. Wages rose, economies expanded, and life appeared to improve. But the foundation was weakening. The cost of living began rising faster than incomes. Housing, once attainable, started drifting out of reach. In the 1980s and 1990s, financial deregulation allowed banks to lend more aggressively. Suddenly, borrowing replaced saving. Debt became the engine of prosperity. People felt wealthier because they could access credit, not because they earned more. This was the rise of the modern cost of living crisis. Prices weren't just going up. The very definition of affordability was changing. Housing was no longer shelter, it became an investment vehicle. Education was no longer a right, it became a profitable industry. Healthcare shifted from service to business, essentials turned into commodities. Then came the breaking point. The 2008 financial crisis exposed the fragility of a debt-driven economy. Millions lost jobs, homes, and savings. Governments responded with stimulus, bailouts, and near-zero interest rates. Money flowed freely again, but instead of reaching ordinary people, it concentrated in the hands of corporations, investors, and financial institutions. Asset prices surged. Stocks soared. Real estate skyrocketed. And while the wealthy recovered quickly, the average person fell further behind. This is where the hidden war over living costs accelerated. Because after 2008, something fundamental changed. Growth became dependent on keeping prices high. Entire economic systems now rely on rising housing costs, rising fees, rising consumer spending, and rising debt. If prices fall, the system risks collapse, so the cost of living must rise, no matter the consequence. By the time the world entered the pandemic era, this structure was already unstable. Trillions in new money entered circulation. Supply chains fractured. Governments and central banks insisted inflation was temporary. But when the dust settled, the truth became unavoidable. Prices didn't return to normal. They formed a new baseline. This brings us to 2025. People expected inflation to slow, wages to catch up, and life to become affordable again. Instead, something far more troubling happened. Even as inflation rates cooled, living costs stayed high. Housing remained expensive. Food prices stayed elevated. Insurance, healthcare, and transportation continued climbing. Why? Because once companies and industries raised prices, they discovered something important. Consumers had no choice but to pay. Debt statistics reveal the fallout. Household debt has reached record levels. Credit card interest rates now exceed 20%. Mortgage payments have doubled for many families. Rent consumes half or more of monthly income in major cities. The cost of simply existing has become a financial burden. But the most shocking data isn't about prices. It's about what people are losing. Savings rates have collapsed. Emergency funds are disappearing. Retirement plans are delayed or abandoned. People are working more hours, taking multiple jobs, and yet feel poorer than ever. The cost of living isn't just measured in money, it's measured in time, stress, and stolen futures. Governments promise solutions: subsidies, minimum wage increases, tax credits, price caps. But these fixes rarely address the root cause. If wages rise, businesses raise prices to maintain profit. If assistance increases, demand grows, and prices follow. If interest rates drop, borrowing surges and assets inflate again. The cycle repeats. The failed fixes only mask the symptoms while reinforcing the underlying problem. The system needs higher living costs to function. A pattern emerges throughout history. Every major economic shift follows the same stages: separation of money from real value, expansion of debt, rising asset prices, widening inequality, and eventual strain on ordinary citizens. The same sequence played out in ancient Rome with coin debasement, in 1920s Germany with hyperinflation, in the 1970s with stagflation, and again after 2008. Now, in 2025, we are watching the pattern repeat on a global scale. Modern parallels are disturbing. Global food prices have doubled over the past decade. Home ownership rates among young adults have collapsed. Wealth is increasingly concentrated. For the first time in modern history, many believe their children will live worse lives than they did. This isn't just economic pressure. It's a shift in societal expectations. Financial stability has become a luxury. So what is the real cost of living in 2025? It's not just the price of essentials. It's the price of participating in a system that demands constant growth, constant spending, and constant debt. The cost is financial dependence. The cost is reduced freedom. The cost is the loss of security that previous generations took for granted. From this entire story, 3 key takeaways stand out. First, the cost of living is rising not simply because prices increase, but because the economic system requires it. Without higher costs, debt cannot expand, and the structure begins to fail. Second, wages are no longer tied to productivity or value. They are tied to what the system can afford to give without collapsing profits. Third, the greatest threat is not inflation itself, but the erosion of financial resilience. When people have no savings, no stability, and no margin for crisis, they become dependent. Dependence is power. The warning is clear. If the cost of living continues rising faster than financial security, millions will enter permanent economic fragility. The danger isn't just personal hardship, it's societal instability. When a majority feels trapped, systems change, sometimes slowly, sometimes violently. The real cost of living in 2025 is the realization that the system benefits from keeping you on the edge, but awareness changes everything. Once you understand the forces shaping your financial reality, you can begin making decisions that protect real value, reduce dependence, and build resilience. If this breakdown opened your eyes, subscribe and turn on notifications. There is much more beneath the surface, and the more we uncover, the better prepared we become in a world where simply living has become one of the most expensive challenges in history. And remember, this is Dollaroid. If you want to stay ahead, protect your wealth, and understand the hidden mechanics of the financial world, sure you subscribe to Dollaroid, like this video, and join us for more deep financial investigations.